So I just recently got my hands on a Deluzhnoa Staff, and damn, that thing hits hard. So in this video, I want to compare it versus all the other tier 2 staffs available, including the new Greyeye Staff, and ultimately using this much more advanced calculator that I've gone and created from a lot of extensive testings. Additionally, I want to go through my updates with regards to my Invocator build. Just a few gear changes here, skills, specializations, and masteries. So let's begin by how does the Deluzhnoa Staff actually work and how effective is it versus other staffs? Well, we have to look at what actually happens when you use it. It changes your Hellfire Rain, as described. Be aware the radius gets increased to 5 meters, not say the effective range. That's still limited by your standard weapon range here, which does increase as per the 16% bonus from the Deluzhnoa Staff, which is fairly neat. But this radius then is a little bit bigger. You see the radius there, that's the standard, and then when you actually go and cast it, you can see it's a little bit bigger. Using the Foci Staff, you can see that's the area of the normal Hellfire Rain. But what also happens is it now hits 18 times instead of the standard 12. So you get 6 more like meteors, which with the staff are reskinned as like ice shards. It removes the burning effects. This doesn't mean it removes the burning effects from your target. Those still remain there. Like you can see this here. I have 5 burning stacks. I cast my Hellfire Rain, the ice version, and it doesn't remove those. What it means is it removes the burning effect that the Hellfire Rain can apply. It no longer applies the burning. It just has boosted damage, which is actually pretty significant. You gains a 15% boost there directly to the ability, has that chance to weaken targets removing their movement speed, irrelevant for PvE in most cases, and then also boosts all your ice skills by 10%. So what happens is you gain a 25% damage boost to Hellfire Rain by using the Deluzhnoa Staff. I've run the numbers. You check the damage hit in game, you can see 11,000, and as per the calculations, this equates to a 25% multiplicative damage boost. This is on the very first hit. You then have the smaller meteors like these here, and they hit for 7,375. You can see a better, clearer picture of that here. And that corresponds to also a 25% multiplicative damage boost. It is not a 15% and then a 10% multiplicative. The 10 and the 15 add together. As you can see, this would be then 7,462, a bit more than what we actually see in game. So it's actually a 25% boost that's multiplicative. Tiny bit less, but nonetheless very effective. So this staff contributes a ton to the damage here on Invocator, with Hellfire Rain being one of your hardest hitting abilities. But that is not to say it doesn't have some drawbacks, like only having 12 attribute points versus the Foci having all that dexterity on top, along with species damage bonus and slightly better attack speed. So let's have a look at each of these, and what you really need to do is to create a breakdown using all of those stats and then all of your abilities based on their cooldowns, how much cooldown reduction you do have, and I've pretty much gone and accounted for everything here. This is your standard abilities you would use on Invocator and what I tested to perform the best, and these stats simply are derived from a min-max build I created on Questlog using this gear, and then using the Deluzhnoa Staff and checking that by simply switching to the other staffs, looking at the stats, plugging in the numbers, and this is the Foci Staff. You have the Deluzhnoa Staff, and then you have the Grayeye, Aragon, Soulwind, Reform, Queen Bellandir, Daigon. All of that results in a little chart like this, where you can see the Deluzhnoa Staff can be significantly better. This is again because the sheer amount of damage you gain through Hellfire Rain, and this is then with the Deluzhnoa spec, so it now hits 18 times maximum with a 25% multiplicative bonus on both those damaging hits from the ability. So it contributes to over 15% of your overall damage here. Combining with a bit higher base damage, as you can see the Foci staff's a little bit lower, this results in, yes, over a 9% increase versus like Greyeye, creating this little charts versus the other weapons. I will have a link in the video description. You can access this full sheet for yourself. And again, it's pretty much accounting for everything possible. You have these set stats, which you have to be aware change based on the staff you're using. You get differences in attack speed, in base damage, in cooldown, buff duration, critical hit, all of which again change the amount of damage all of your abilities are going to be doing. I've gone and looked at the Greyeye Staff. You can see the table and the math of that here. And ultimately, I've accounted for the Greyeye Staff having a multiplicative 5% damage boost to your lightning skills. I haven't gone and fully tested this staff yet, so it might not be a fully multiplicative bonus, but the only lightning skill would be chain lightning that it might stack, and then it would be a teeny bit less damage, but not by that much more. And already you can see it's not that great of a staff to use versus the others in this PvE scenario. That bonus is just not good enough, and then it's missing base damage, it's missing attribute points, and the Foci staff just ends up better than it, including even the Deluzhnoa being far better than it. Again, over a 9% increase. Your Aragon Soulwind staff, it does have the ability to give you a bit of an extra damage boost on, say, your Frost Smoke Screen, but I've looked at a table for that. You can see it here, like, if it was giving that 150% damage over 5 hits, that's like a 1.7% overall because it has a 27-second cooldown. It is affected by cooldown speed, which is accounted for, and ultimately a 1.7% damaging ability overall is just bad. You don't want to switch out any of these. I've already got 8 different skills here, and your other 4 skills are usually going to be these 3 buff abilities: Enchanting Time, High Focus, Valorous Barrier, and then you'll generally run like Inner Peace. You can, for a bit more burst damage, run Inferno Wave, as that is like a 4% overall. I looked at the Reform staff. This one really is just a basic staff, not much to explain there, and yeah, is pretty much the worst here. That's not surprising. Queen Bellandir, I have accounted for the insect explosion, but in single target it's only going to be like 540% of your base damage, and the amount of times it can trigger is based on how many times you apply burning, which is going to be Hellfire Rain and the focused fire bombs. So it's going to be based on their cooldowns and how often you're casting them, and it results in less than a 1% damage increase. And then looking at all the stats that change based on actually using this staff, you find it's also only very slightly better than Greyeye. Not that great here. The place that it's actually very good is going to be multi-target, when you can get that explosion damage on groups of enemies. But honestly, it's not a big deal to min-max for multi-target unless you're in PvP. So I wouldn't get this unless you're doing group PvP content and want those explosions. And finally, the Diggon Staff. I have gone and put the damage boost as multiplicative here, at a multiplicative fire damage. And again, it's only going to contribute to those fire skills, along with a 15% to your burning, which also contributes to a 15% to the burning that goes into your Cursed Explosion, all accounted for. And it's still only like just about 1% better than Greyeye, falling quite significantly behind Foci. You may have seen my previous video where I compared the two. My math was a little bit more crude there, and it didn't fully account for everything, like this table now does. Again, you can double check everything for yourself with a link in the video description for this full document. But yes, we end up with the differences of these with a chart like this. Be aware again, it's for Invocator and PvE single target boss fights. That's where your damage matters most. So now I want to jump to some build updates. What gear I've been going with here for Invocator, and ultimately my full rotation. The first time I presented this build to you guys, I didn't actually give a full rotation. I was still working on it, and this is what I've ultimately concluded on works to be the best. There should be a link in the video description below. You can access my quest log. Again, this is simply my current build which I will update based on my progress. I still need to update the runes to purple, but it's basically still the same runes. And I've changed it a bit. I'm not personally going with the Transcendent set, even though I did obtain it. I'm just not a fan of the range, and I have been playing quite a lot of trials and they require certain mechanics, and it's generally just easier to be closer to the boss. Beating up tier 5 Twisted Laboratory, quite a bit of fun, does take time. I done it like twice already, 2 different groups just to help them out, and Invocator performs super well here. Having that bit of extra range is super helpful versus say Dark Blighter. If I was to run that here with the boss moving around the place, it can get quite infuriating. And then having the different roles of people needing to like bait the boomerangs, and so I have quite a bit of experience playing Invocator, and I would ultimately go with this build. 2-piece Chosen for the damage over time, and 2-piece Shadow Harvester, which will eventually get replaced by 2-piece Spectral. If you want to min-max, you would go with the Sacred Repose pieces just to get the 24% damage over time, and you would get like the Fractured World spray stead along with the Pendant of Frozen Tears, but I will generally be stopping at step 3 as that's fairly decent and accessible. Again, there is still the alternative to run Transcendent. It can be a teeny bit more damage if you actually play at that ranges. I put in the description some numbers here, and if you're at 20 meters or further away, Transcendent set can be better. In terms of my skills, it changes a little bit. Like sometimes I'm using Infernal Wave instead of Inner Peace if it's just like a field boss where you don't need the mana, or even if you're in a really good group where you have a healer who gives you a ton of mana. Focused Firebombs, you don't need the movement speed one and you don't need the projectile speed. I just prefer to run those, but if you want to min-max it a little bit for burst damage immediately, you could put those specs into Touch of Despair so that you get the stacks much quicker. At least you have the chance to do so. And yes, you can see those skill specs here. It's definitely worth to run Chaining Bolt with that here. As you can see, it's like a 2.6% overall damage increase on a skill that you're already using. In terms of weapon masteries, Wand, I don't believe has changed. Still get all of those. Staff, you want to be getting the dual cast for your auto attacks. And then you will be wanting to try and get Heat Fusion here. So get that damage over time. And then also the critical hit expertise here for the critical hit chance. You can get the range if you really want that, but you mainly get this for the burning. I have looked at Detonator Bombardment and even Spear, but it just does not contribute a lot of damage, and it's just not worth using the skill because of its really long cooldown. Once you get more points, you can get this Power Surge. It'll be a little bit more base damage, which is good, and you don't need Fire Wave Amplifier unless you're running multi-target. And ultimately, this is your rotation. Fairly simple. You're using that Touch of Despair to activate Vampiric Contract, then your buffs like Enchanting Time, High Focus, Valorous Barrier, Skill Damage Boost, and Maximum Damage buffs. Hellfire Rain, I should adjust that typo, and this gives you generally burning stacks unless you're using Deluzhnoa. Then Focused Fire Bombs adds more burning stacks. Then Touch of Despair, Decaying Touch, Curse Explosion. This is your Curse Explosion combo, where the damage of that explosion is based on the maximum amount of damage your burning would do over its entire duration, and Decaying Touch and Touch of Despair based on how much time is remaining on those dots. So that's why you need to cast them just before using Curse Explosion to maximize that damage. And then your filler skills is Chain Lightning with a very low cooldown, Fireball, Barrage, and Judgment Lightning. You can switch Judgment Lightning over to Inferno Wave because again, Inferno Wave is actually a little bit more damage. It's just Inferno Wave requires like skill specializations where Judgment Lightning does not. And if you are running the Deluzhnoa Staff and no longer have the burnings on your Hellfire Rain, this can be a little bit problematic for burst damage. In longer boss fights, you have no problem because every time you cast Focused Firebombs on your target, you're simply adding 5 of those burning stacks. And you want to get to 10 burning stacks. So usually you'd be able to cast Hellfire Rain and then the Fireball and you would have 10 burning stacks. But with the Deluzhnoa stacks, you don't have that. And so what you can use again is if you went with Inferno Wave with like this specialization, you can now cast your Fireball, then your Inferno Wave, and you pretty much have 9 burning stacks. If you get the chance to cast it second time, you have that 10. So you would use that Inferno Wave just after Firebombs. then Touch of Despair, Decaying Touch, Curse Explosion for that combo, and then your filler skills. So very simple. And when everything's like on cooldown and you need to prioritize certain abilities, always prioritize Focused Firebombs. It's your hardest hitting ability, contributing like nearly 13% damage with a very low cooldown, and then your other hardest hitting ability, of course, is Hellfire Rain. But that has a very long cooldown and you can't always use it in this rotation. You pretty much just use it when it's off cooldown after you've cast like at least Valorous Barrier. Again, always use your dots, Touch of Despair and Decaying Touch before Curse Explosion. Also ideally have cast a fire skill before you use that too. And then like you can use Inner Peace for mana regen and mana cost efficiency, or using again Inferno Wave like I do in some boss fights. Inner Peace, even if you don't want to sit there to channel it, it's good to just cast it and then like jump to cancel that, just to have the mana cost efficiency, and that will help extend the lifetime of your maximum mana. But that is ultimately it. Invocator can be a lot of fun, feels very effective, and you can easily switch off using the Vampiric Onslaught mastery and have a ton of healing sustain. You are losing damage, so if you have a good healer, then yes, of course, don't use it. But if you're going in like solo content, your solo dungeons, going with randoms, you don't trust the healer, totally switch off using Vampiric Onslaught Wand Mastery and you have an insane amount of healing as long as you're targeting yourself. And overall, Invocator right now is pretty much the best class to use in PvE as a damage dealer, just because of the abilities you play at ranged and the sheer amount of damage it has. I still prefer the playstyle of Dark Blighter, but it's definitely a lot more challenging, especially in certain boss fights. And when you have to move away from your boss, or the boss moves a lot, then you just lose out on damage. Versus Invocator, you have a better range and you just hit the boss anyway, even if he's moved a bit. So overall, I hope this helps. Again, good to do some testing on the Deluzhnoa Staff, and it's actually super effective. The only drawback is again that radius increase. You can see it's gone to 5 meters, which means it's now larger and makes it harder for all of those extra meteors to actually hit the target. You need to have bosses that are like big, they need to be wide, having a large hitbox like this one, the bigger the better, and you will get all those damage hits on them and capitalize on a ton of extra damage from the Deluzhnoa Staff. So on a dummy like this, Hellfire Rain doesn't feel good, and it's kind of even worse with the Deluzhnoa Staff. I really think there should be an extra specialization added to that Hellfire Rain, which would allow it to be more single target, where all the meteors would fall in a smaller space. I think that would be a good thing for at least the Deluzhnoa Staff specifically. But that's it for now. Thanks all for watching, and we'll see you guys around.